Hello and welcome to Internet Capital Markets, the weekly show where we explore how financial systems are being rebuilt on the web. Each week, we sit down with the builders, investors, and institutional leaders shaping this transformation. From tokenized assets to decentralized finance, stablecoins, and everything in between. Today's show is brought to you by TrustByte, Smart Treasury for Internet Capital Markets. And before we introduce our guest today, I'd like to welcome my co-founder and co-host Jonas to the show.
Welcome, and GM, everybody. Really nice to see you again this week. And this week, we have Anisha Goel, the co-founder of Bloctopus on the show. Welcome, Anisha. And Bloctopus is also a Texas company, and that's where we also met the first time when we were running through our Texas program this year. So we met Anisha and her team in London, and they're essentially building DevOps infrastructure for Web3 developers and projects, protocols. And previously, she was head of product at Perpetual protocol, and she has also a master's degree from the ESCP Business School. Welcome, Anisha.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, more than welcome. Really exciting to speak to another Texas company. Texas is like family to us. Maybe you can echo that.
Absolutely.
But maybe to start off, for everyone who doesn't know you yet, could you introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us what Bloctopus actually does and how it came to life?
Yes, happy to do that. So my name is Anisha, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Bloctopus. Maybe I'll quickly start with introducing myself and how I came to what I was doing before Bloctopus. So my background is primarily in fintech. So I started with some M&A advisory, and since then I've been working with different fintechs in India and in Europe. I loved doing fintech. We built some amazing products, including alternative credit underwriting models for people who don't have a reliable credit history. We were using a lot of machine learning and basically a lot of AI before it was called AI, essentially. And we were actually extending credit to people who don't have any credit history, just using the data from their mobile and from their apps and things like that. But anyway, at some point, and I was kind of in Web3 since 2017, but more on the periphery because I was still working full time in fintech. But I was just dabbling in some tokens and some NFTs, some very embarrassing NFTs back then. At some point, I met the team at Perpetual Protocol, really cool Taiwanese team. They were the leading perps exchange in the world for a while at the peak of DeFi summer. And I got in touch with the team. We really resonated, and I ended up joining the team because I'd been meaning to get into Web3 for quite some time. So that was my first foray into Web3. I did pretty much I wore every hat while I was at Perp. I was leading the grants program. I was leading one of the new product launches. At some point, I was doing the access with like partnerships with market makers, growth, etc. So and also at the same time, like through my period there, we saw the Luna crash, the FTX crash, and so we saw the highs of all highs at DeFi summer, and we saw the lows of all lows. So it was quite an eventful journey at Perpetual Protocol. But around that time, I met my co-founder Till, who was working on a simulation technology with the Ethereum Foundation and was working on an open source tool. And as we got talking, we were looking into more of like, how everyone talks about blockchain being super composable, or specifically DeFi being super composable. But we were facing a lot of challenges on the ground to get developers to actually build products on us, like vaults or structured products and things like that. So it was very difficult for them to actually backtest anything. It was very difficult for us to create a stable enough dev environment that someone can use externally. And some of the things that Till was looking into at the time were exactly solving that problem. So at some point we decided to do this. We decided to start Bloctopus together, which brings us to your second question of what really is Bloctopus. We are simply a DevOps platform that allows you to create on-chain dev environments on demand. For any testing, CI/CD, etc. I will say there's some construction going on around. So if you can't hear me at any point, just let me know. I'll pause my audio for a few seconds. So Bloctopus is a DevOps platform. We allow anyone to create on-chain environments, either locally or on the cloud, or directly on chain, which is a new feature, which is directly on mainnet, which is a new feature which is coming up soon. But the core idea is that blockchains are by definition a shared network which are being run by hundreds and thousands of computers around the world, and there is no way to actually create an exact replica of it without essentially just doing it or having a parallel Ethereum running and spending all those resources. So what we need to figure out as a dev tool is the most reasonable way that enables a realistic enough testing before some code goes and merges with your final on-chain repo. And that's what we do. We create environments that allow developers to test that in as realistic a way as possible.
Very cool. I think, you already answered my second question. So Jeremy, please go ahead with the next one.
Really curious, and thank you for the context and the intro. Really curious, when or before you started Bloctopus, what was the frustration that you had when building or testing Web3 apps that ultimately pushed you to start the company?
Yeah. I mean, so I touched on a couple of things, right? But really, like when we started, like at the Perps exchange or all exchanges at the time, the big bet was on this composability side, right? Like, okay, you can have a liquidity layer, and then lots of people can build on top of it, and then Uniswap has done. We were built on top of Uniswap, for that matter, and it took me a while. I remember when I had just joined Web3 to understand what building on top actually means, because it's like there's no APIs here, you're just on top of it. But what does that mean, right? So it took me a while to actually like comprehend that. But once I did, I sort of understood the power of it, and I was like, oh, I see, this is what people are talking about when they say composable and it's all on top of the other. That you're literally using the underlying infrastructure and the underlying liquidity as if it were your own, not just using some sort of an API to connect the two, right? So that was the eye-opening part. But I think the challenge is that, like as I said, it's very difficult to, when you're building just stuff on top of the other, it's very difficult to create reasonable like sandboxes that support that infrastructure. And that was the biggest problem we faced. And that was, as someone who was leading the grants program for a while there, I faced that problem all the time, where like it was very difficult to get traditional sort of proprietary market makers or traders on board, because they couldn't replicate the environments in a deterministic way, and they couldn't be sure of how their strategy is going to run. Now, obviously, this is back in like a few years ago, and a lot has changed since, but probably not for something like Uniswap. But yeah, there's been a lot of things that have come up on top. There's been intent-based infrastructures that can, give you a very Web2 like experience. But fundamentally, with just the composability aspect of smart contracts, that was the big problem. Like, how do you replicate that, and how can you build a product that talks to them or builds on top of them without actually going through a sandbox?
Actually, the multi-layered approach. Okay, now we are around lots of developers and participated in hackathons ourselves, and we see kind of a best practice that you build on public testnets, but there are limitations.
Yeah.
And we're really curious, if you think of building serious financial applications, why are public testnets fundamentally insufficient?
Yeah. So I think traditionally, if you speak with any on-chain developer, right, they'll tell you this journey that they follow. they write some code, they deploy it in like a local hard hat kind of an environment. And then at some point when the application is more or less ready, they'll go onto a public testnet, and then finally they'll deploy it on main. There are, I think, all of these different stages work well in certain scenarios, right? So for your local environment, it's very good because you can bring in your entire mainnet state, but it's completely isolated. So it's not actually a blockchain. It just sort of has the state. So you have all the smart contracts, you have basically all of the accounts balances, everything. So you can test your code quite easily. The challenge with that is that anything that you depend on, any Oracle or anything else that you depend on, is not there. So those things will just not work. But yeah, you'll have the contracts. And then you move on to public testnets, which honestly I think are for most part obsolete now. They're being used, but I don't think that, I think they'll only be used less and less moving forward. That's basically what I originally said. Like, it is a real blockchain, and for foundations, the cost of running these public test nets is basically like, of course they have fewer nodes or less decentralized than what the main net would be, but it's exactly the cost of running two parallel networks, right? So it is still running the whole time. So you still have latency and everything, but they will never have the main net state, because if it did, it would cost the same and be the same as running another network. So I think that the reason that developers use that is, of course, because foundations are bearing the cost of that right now, and they're providing it to developers for free. But they don't have the mainnet state, and there's a reason that faucets and everything don't work properly on public testnets, because it can get very unstable if a lot of developers decide. So it's like a common infrastructure. So it's same as in web 2, if you had like just one sandbox for like every developer in the world to build their own product, right? So it doesn't really work, which and also a lot of very critical infrastructure is not on public testnets anymore for that reason. So cross-chain protocols is one of them, but a lot more things now that are just not, like, a lot of APIs are just not available on public testnets. So I think a lot of testing, especially for more institutions or more mature companies, has now moved to mainnet directly. Because that's how, like, that's the only way to test the product more properly, and which ends up being the final state. But even on that, like, there are ways of like doing secret deployments on mainnet, which is not the real one, and then bringing it back to your main code base, etc. So, but I think a lot of it has just moved to deploying on mainnet directly.
Yeah, I like that. Mainnet is not, some would argue. No, just kidding. But I mean, we already touched on, like, almost all blockchains have devnets, testnets, and mainnets, and you also laid out like why developers or like protocols in general would need something like Bloctopus. I think by now it's like quite obvious. But would you still see like that protocols, or like, let's say a blockchain for now, still need like devnets and testnets, or like would be like a mainnet enough, and then in addition to applications like Bloctopus for development?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think each of them, as I said, right, like, it's, if irrespective of whether or not Bloctopus existed, developers need some place to execute their code. They need some sort of a runtime where this code can work and where you can see how it's working. Now, the way you create that runtime is, we are trying to be less and less opinionated of how to create that runtime the best way. So if a local fork solves the problem, if it's only just dependent on some on-chain contracts, you don't need a lot of backend infra for it, that's the best way. If all you need to test is, okay, how does the, just like a realistic gas and just some sort of realistic environment, but you don't need the mainnet state, then I think testnets is perfectly valid place to test out your code, right? But if you need everything else, then you need to go on mainnet. There's no Bloctopus environment or any other environment will replicate the mainnet in a way that mainnet is, because it just has everything, like hundreds and thousands of networks are computers are coordinating together to create this state, which cannot be replicated in a siloed environment. So I think the main thing is to smartly, and then there is the AI part, right? Like it's also, does the agent understand, can the agent use the mainnet safely? Can the agent run the test enough? What does it need to do? Because a lot of code is being written by AI, and testing is being done by AI. So the main thing is to identify at what stage of development are we in at the moment, and what's the environment you need to test that code, and take it step by step in the cheapest way possible. So the solution that we are kind of moving towards with Bloctopus is not really to be opinionated of like, oh, hard hat is good, or public testnets are good, or they're not good. It's really just to look at like, what's the need of that particular test? Is it just to check the syntax? And also for certain tests, you don't just need on-chain environments. You need the backend as well for the service to actually run, right? So you need a combination of like a part of your cloud infrastructure to be spun up and then to test it there. So it's more about, you can call it like a smarter routing of like, okay, this is what's needed right now for, let's say, this PR review, and this is how we spin up an environment to do it.
Yeah, that makes definitely sense here. And also, like when we are thinking about like, it's like, let's say, easy to develop like something on one blockchain. But if you are like thinking about scenarios where you have like multiple blockchains, right? For example, for something like bridge protocols,
yeah,
then it becomes like way more complex immediately, right? Would you argue that especially bridge protocols can benefit from solutions like Bloctopus?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was actually kind of like our early successes was from there, from cross-chain dApps, cross-chain dexes, bridges, and things like that, because it is no cross-chain messaging protocol is fully available on testnets, or fully maintained on testnets. So there's not really any way to simulate end-to-end cross-chain flows. And if you think about it, like anything that has an off-chain component is not fully available on testnets, because from that protocol's point of view, you have to, again, do things twice, exactly how the blockchains do it. Like you have to run the infra twice, you have to run the servers, everything is running both for mainnet and for testnet, right? And they will actually tell you to just test on mainnet. Which could in many cases be perfectly okay. Like you can just create a copy, probably need to then wire some of your backend to the replica that you're maintaining on chain, and maybe have some solution for creating like ephemeral versions on chain. But it might just be the best way to test that particular piece of code or that particular feature. You're muted, I think.
That completely makes sense. Thanks. So if we look at, for example, the security aspect of things, what kind of bugs or failures simply cannot be caught without a reproducible production-like environment that you spin up for them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So with AI, I think a lot of things have changed. There's no more of like small syntax errors or deployment issues, etc. Like they are less likely to happen, because it takes care of that kind of stuff. It really ends up being more around integration testing and end-to-end testing, right? And following the business logic of like, okay, the code works, and will most probably compile and deploy as well, but does it really do what you intended it to do? Does it work with the front end as intended? Does it work with the back end as intended? Is it doing the things that are intended? So I think those are the things which makes it both easier and harder, because I think those are the kind of things that it's not so easy to catch with just like you would have to make the AI do a little bit more work, give it a lot more context for it to actually understand, or very often just do it manually. Like you'd have to look at the code, actually deploy it, and see whether it does the things that you're asking it to do.
Thank you so much. Jonas, back to you.
Oh, yeah. Obviously, I had like the different order in mind. So sorry about that. Usually we do 2 questions each of us, but never mind. So if we are now looking a little bit more into the future, and like where the industry will evolve over the next couple of months, or like where do you see like the development environments are going on blockchain or on the protocol level? Let's say over the next 2, 3, maybe 4, 5 years, and what pieces or like what kind of like functionalities and tools are still missing?
Yeah. So I think let's look at it from 2 ways, right? Like one is just from a development side, and then the other is just like from where the blockchain industry is going. So from a development point of view, I think all code will be, or most code will be, written by AI in the future. I think there's been a lot of news already of like, yes, everyone uses it, and there's like big fang kind of companies that have come out and said that, oh, 30% of our code is written by AI, 40% of our code is now written by AI. And I think that number will probably settle at like upwards of 80%. And then the thing that's missing in like why is it 30 and not 80 is because there are certain things that AI is not very good at, right? Like there's still challenges with completing, like it can do individual tasks really well, but I think the challenge then is like for it to understand the DevOps side is not really sorted, right? It's not so good at, then there, like it's still getting to a stage where it can actually deploy your entire infrastructure or improve it or create it from scratch and tear it apart, and or maybe optimize it and things like that. So I think as it gets better at that, like going through the entire journey of understanding the context, writing the code, running the code, and then optimizing it, it would I think that's when the next wave of transformation would happen. From a Web3 side, like I think it's always, there's never a dull day in blockchain. That's one thing we can say safely. There's been a lot of I think the next wave is going to be all about like privacy and how you can have like privacy solutions integrated with blockchains, and that obviously ties back to developers as well, because I think it's not going to be so straightforward of just creating on-chain environments. There's going to be a lot more of processing, data processing, and zero knowledge processing that will happen on the off-chain side. So and then brought back, and then verifiability on chain versus processing off chain. I think there's going to be a lot of different solutions that come there, which will impact the way that we think about dev environments, because it's again, like it's not going to be so straightforward as just creating a replica of Ethereum and that being like the product where everyone goes to for testing their applications.
All right, thank you so much. It's time to switch gears a little bit. We come to quickfire, and I will ask you one question each. You have one word to answer. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. The most important difference that we have to understand when scaling from Web 2 to Web 3.
When scaling on Web 3 to Web 2.
Versus Web 2, yeah.
The most important thing. Yeah, you're part of the crew. It's a common network now.
Good point. One Web 2 developer habit Web 3 desperately needs to adopt.
I don't know about habits, but I think what's desperately needed is the same amount of context for AI, because I think it's more challenging for Web3 developers, like unless you're working on something that it already knows. There's new languages, new blockchains, new infrastructure. And I think that amount of context for AI is sorry, that was more than one word, but yeah, AI context is the one word I would say.
That's good. Now let's keep it short for the next ones. Where does crypto rely on trust?
Where does crypto rely on trust? APIs.
Yeah. Is there anything you've recently changed your mind about?
that testing in mainnet is not good enough.
The most overused excuse for skipping proper testing.
Trust me, bro.
One tool or practice every on-chain team should use but doesn't.
Bloctopus. Sorry, I had to.
The hardest thing to simulate in a blockchain system today.
Decentralization.
If Bloctopus succeeds, what becomes invisible to the users but critical underneath?
Going off-chain to on-chain.
And now one sentence. If on-chain capital markets reach tens of trillions in value, what role will testing and simulation infrastructure like Bloctopus play behind the scenes?
It will bring trust and confidence in the development lifecycle.
Yeah, I like that answer a lot. I think there's like much to be done, especially now where we see like institutions coming in and bringing billions, if not trillions of dollars on chain. They have like simply a different standard. But yeah, it was fun, Anisha. Thank you so much. And before we wrap up the show, how do people find you and Bloctopus, and who should we talk to next?
How do people find us? Yeah, I mean, you can go to bloctopus.io. It's BL octopus without the K, so bloctopus.io. And or you can reach out to me at anisha@bloctopus.io. And who should you guys talk to? I don't know. We recently partnered with a company called Block Scout, which is a block explorer. I don't know if you guys have spoken to them, but yeah, you should definitely have them on the show.
Cool. We will try to get them. Thank you so much. That wraps up this week's episode for Internet Capital Markets. A huge thank you to Anisha for joining us and sharing her insights. If you enjoyed today's discussion, make sure to subscribe, rate, and share the show. It helps us to bring more conversations like this to the next week's episodes. This is Internet Capital Markets. Please join us next week. Until then, stay curious, stay connected, and keep building the future of finance. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.